Hi, everybody. This is Tracy. And today I want to talk to you about boundaries. I've got a very special guest to introduce you to. And my question to you is, did you learn about boundaries as a child? I didn't. In fact, because I have now discovered that I am a people pleaser, you can call me codependent, you can call me anything you want. But I was always afraid to disappoint others. And I never took value in my own needs. I was always doing for others, as I'm sure many of you do. But when we do this, we are setting ourselves up to be abused by narcissists, sociopaths, psychopaths, or just jerks. Because when we don't set boundaries, these are like the rules of our life. If you don't know what you want, or if someone violates something that makes you sad or feel icky inside, then that's a boundary that you have to define. My guest today is Sharon Martin. She's a licensed psychotherapist in California. She's a writer, a speaker, and a media contributor to emotional health and relationship places like Psych Central. She's got a great blog, an amazing newsletter that I read every single week it comes. And she's written 2 books on boundary setting, and I'd like you to welcome Sharon Martin. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Tracy.
You're welcome. We're going to talk today about boundaries, but before we get into boundaries, one of the most important things that I love in your book was the beginning, talking about people pleasing. Mm-hmm. And I would love it if you could explain to us, what is people pleasing?
Sure. Well, kind of like the name says, it's when we start to live our lives for other people. We're basically more concerned about pleasing other people than we are about ourselves. And there are a couple of things that happen. So one is like we sort of lose our identity, like who we really are as people, because, life is then no longer about like, what am I interested in? What do I like? And so sometimes it can be simple things like, recognize what are your hobbies, or what do you like to eat versus what does your partner want to do on the weekends? It's all about somebody else. And so there's this focus on other people and making them happy. And like I said, you're sort of losing this part of who you are. And then often what happens is some resentment and some anger, starts to build up over time. Mm-hmm. Of my needs are not getting met because I'm so busy doing what everybody else wants me to do, that you get depleted, you get physically tired, you get emotionally tired. And like I said, you kind of get this anger and resentment, like, when's it going to be my turn? When do I get to do what I want? And so that's sort of people pleasing. And I think that then connects over, to the boundaries part that we wanted to talk about, because when we're not setting boundaries, essentially, when we're people pleasing all of the time, right? We've kind of lost that separation between you and me. It's like I'm sort of melded into, the other person almost. So there isn't like that healthy separation that tells us, this is me as a separate person and you as a separate person.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I know that people pleasers hold a lot of fear inside of them that if they don't please the other person, they're going to leave.
Yes. And I think that's probably that real common thread that underlies all of the challenges in setting boundaries and wanting to avoid any conflict and wanting to avoid people to being upset with us, is that real deep and sometimes unconscious fear that setting the boundary, standing up for myself is going to result in a rejection, somebody not loving us, somebody not wanting us. And that's that real core, belief that we have often, that we're not lovable, that we're not worthwhile. And, when you kind of go through life with that mindset, you're looking for it everywhere. And whatever it is you're looking for, you tend to find confirmation of it. So you're, like you said, you're living in this fear-based place where you don't want to say anything that might rock the boat or that might be upsetting to somebody else. But there's a price that you pay for that also, right? There's a lot of things that you miss out on doing, a lot of things, enjoyment in life. There's a lot of those negative feelings. And sometimes there's absolutely, plain old, abuse, physical and emotional abuse that comes as part of that price too, when you're allowing, people to mistreat you because you're afraid that if you put a stop to it and you say, no, that's not okay with me, that they're going to be like, well, I'm out of here then.
Right. And I know that for me, I didn't know I was a people pleaser until I learned about my entire life. Like, it wasn't like I consciously said, I'm going to people please. I was actually trained from a child to always do what was right and put all the pieces together and make everybody happy. And so we unconsciously hold on to that people pleasing, but it is so destructive to us, and we end up losing ourselves. And so when the abuser, we could say any name we want to, we slip it in there, but when the abuser decides to discard us, there's no us anymore. We've lost our soul, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And there's not a, self to come back to, right? There's not that strong sense of who you are, what you believe in, and that you're a worthwhile person.
Mm-hmm. And what you like to do. I mean, you give up what you had as a passion in the beginning because you're so busy doing for others.
Yeah. And sometimes you don't even realize that until, much, much later. Because it's almost like I don't know, you sort of convince yourself, that you do like the same things that the other person likes. There isn't sort of this conscious sense that, I don't like doing, playing basketball or going to basketball games. It's like you do it so many times, just like, that's just the way it is.
Yeah. That's a very, very good explanation of people pleasing and avoiding conflicts and things like that. So let's ask you, well, before we ask you what boundaries are, how did you become a boundary expert?
Well, I want to say in some ways it just sort of naturally evolved. And I think, part of it was for myself in my, personal growth and my developing myself, I needed to learn how to be more assertive. I was definitely a people pleaser and afraid of having people be upset with me. And I was really sensitive to criticism. So I had to figure out how to be able to speak up for myself, which is a form of boundaries. It wasn't really, so much that people were being abusive towards me, but I just didn't feel like that confidence, that what I had to say was going to be worthwhile or that it was going to be right, and so I didn't want to have that, that people being upset with me. So there's definitely a part of that. And then, as I, went along in my training and I started to see clients, it just seemed to be something that came up over and over and over again. People who were just struggling with these difficult relationships and not knowing how to ask for what they wanted in relationships, again, because of that fear. So I don't know, like I said, it just sort of evolved over time, really, and then I started to do a lot more writing and reading about it, and just putting those pieces into place. And I think I realized that it's really just like this fundamental piece of both, I think, being happy in relationships and having satisfying relationships, and even just, like I said, that confidence for yourself and feeling, good about yourself. You have to have boundaries. Boundaries are a necessity in like every single kind of relationship that you have. So it's not just, I need boundaries with my spouse. You need boundaries with your children. You need boundaries with your friends, your parents, your coworkers, your boss, everywhere. So, it's something that it's sort of this universal theme, I think, that everybody needs to figure out.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I'm excited that you have studied all of this and
Mhm.
that you are going to enlighten us with the what are boundaries and how do we
Sure.
define them? How do we, why do we need them? There's so much in there. So you start
Mhm.
wherever you
Mhm.
want.
Okay. Well, I'll try to just give a brief definition of what boundaries are. Um,
Okay.
and they can be a little bit hard to understand just because it actually, like the term can encompass quite a variety of different aspects of boundaries. So one part of it is, like I was saying, is that the boundary is like a separation between one person and the next. And so I think if you actually think about a physical boundary, it's the easiest place to start with it. So like a physical boundary is a way that you protect your physical self, your
Okay.
physical space. Like we all sort of have like an invisible little,
Bubble.
bubble of which we don't want people to, when people get too close, they've like invaded your personal space, right? That would be what we would call a violation of a physical boundary. And, anything that's like an unwanted touch, and I think what else in terms of a physical boundary, but like we're talking about our body essentially, and that we have a right to have people respect how we want to be touched, when we want to be touched, if we want to be touched. All of those things would fall into that physical category. And like I said, I think that's kind of that easiest piece to understand, is that I'm going to make this line that says, sort of like, you can only cross this line, when I say how I say, right? That's my way of saying to you, this is what's okay with me, and this is what's not okay with me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then there's this sort of a whole big clump of stuff that we might call sort of personal boundaries or emotional boundaries. And a lot of times we just stuff a lot of things into that category. In some books on boundaries, you'll see that they have um, broken it down into very specific kinds of boundaries, like financial boundaries or time boundaries or spiritual boundaries or sexual boundaries. Like there's all kinds of things that we could go into. It's not really necessary. I think in other cases we just kind of said, like I said, just sort of put it into this personal boundary category, and that's kind of all the other stuff. But again, it's that same idea where we're saying my boundary is telling you how you can treat me, and it
Mm-hmm.
is this place that you know um, divides me as a separate person from you as a separate person, which means like I'm entitled to have my own ideas, to have my own belief system, and to ask for what I need from you, and tell you what kind of how you can treat me, what my expectations are around that. And so that's the part that is really helpful in a relationship. If you think about a relationship as um, it's sort of like a combined effort to meet each other's needs, right? If we're going to have a healthy relationship, I need to know what it is that you need from me, and I will try to give it to you, and vice versa. And so if you have a relationship where this is never actually talked about and never explained, how am I supposed to know what you expect from me? Even you might say, like, okay, you asked me to come and do this interview, but if you didn't give me any information about what it was going to be about or when it was going to be, I would have no idea. I couldn't deliver on that,
Right.
probably because I'd just be left guessing. And that's, one of the things, that's sort of a pitfall of a lot of relationships, is that we assume the other person knows what we want from them, without actually saying it.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to communicate our boundaries to people and let them know, this is what I need, this is what I want. And to not feel like that's an imposition or there's something wrong with that, or that the other person should just somehow know that.
Mm-hmm.
That this is a basic, piece of a relationship, is that we can talk about it and say, hey, I need this from you. It doesn't mean you're always going to be able to give it to me or do that for me. Um, but I have a much better chance if I asked for it,
Mm-hmm.
right?
I always talk when I talk about boundaries that first of all that these are the rules
Uh-huh.
for being in my life, and
Yes.
a lot of us don't even know the rules in our life, but we know when things aren't like right. Like I
Yes.
don't like it when you do blank.
Uh-huh.
So that's a really good kind of place to set a boundary. If someone makes you feel bad about something,
Yes.
you have to speak up and
Uh-huh.
say, that made me feel this. And there are boundaries. I need this, but there are boundaries like, don't do that, please. And what if someone doesn't listen to your boundaries?
Yes, in the ideal situation, I'm communicating clearly what I need, and you're going to say, okay, I'm going to try to do that. But, of course, we wouldn't be talking about boundaries if it was really that simple. There are lots of people who, unfortunately, are not interested in, what your rules are or what your boundaries are. They feel just entitled that they should be able to do whatever they want.
Mhm.
And they don't really care about whether you like it or not, right? Those are, tend to be people who are really just focused on themselves and not really too concerned about the other person's feelings or needs. So I wish there was an easy answer in dealing with people with like that. I think at the end of the day, we all have to accept that it is our job to set boundaries and tell people how we want to be treated, but that does not mean that other people are going to respect those boundaries. Like, that's where our control ends and somebody else's begins. Like, I cannot control how other people are going to treat me, but I do have choices in what I am going to do when somebody decides to disrespect my boundary, right? And that's one of the things that I always want to reinforce, is that you have choices. You are not a victim of, oh, somebody isn't going to follow my boundaries, so I guess I'm just going to have to do what they want. That's a choice. In most situations. There are exceptions, in which it would be truly dangerous for some people to set boundaries, right? And that's sort of a different conversation, I would say. But for most of us, we have the option to make other choices, but often we don't like any of the choices that we have, right?
Right.
So we just sort of fall into, like, I'm in victim mode and there's nothing I can do about it. My partner just keeps doing this thing that I asked him to stop doing.
Mhm.
Um, but like I said, I can't necessarily force him to do what I want, but there can be consequences of different types that are, that we decide to set for when people don't follow our boundaries. The most extreme consequence is when we decide we can no longer be in a relationship with that person anymore, right? Sometimes it comes to that, where the mistreatment is so extreme that I say, this is completely unhealthy for me to continue in a relationship with somebody who is going to mistreat me and has chosen to, not respect what I have asked from them. They're basically incapable of giving that to me at this point. So I might ultimately have to come to that decision. And I don't mean to say like that's an easy decision or one that you just, come to after one boundary violation. Obviously, this is something, that comes over a course of time when you continue to set the boundary and it continues to be violated in most situations. Although, again, there are times when it is such an extreme situation where you just say, nope, once and I'm done, with that particular violation. But so that's what I would say, is really focus on the fact that you have choices in situations. Sometimes the choice is to say, I'm not going to take this treatment. I'm going to, get up and I'm going to leave the room, or I'm going to get up and leave the house. Like, sometimes that might be the consequence. When I can't, force you to stop calling me those names, I can choose to not sit here and listen to it, though.
Right.
That's an option that I have. So really to think about, what are the things that you can do that take care of you and, promote you feeling good about yourself and standing up for yourself. Like I said, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have an argument or it has to be a big blowout over it, because oftentimes that's not even productive and doesn't get you the results that you're looking for either. Sometimes that's just sort of ultimately a distraction. Now we're off having an argument, and we're even further away from actually having any agreement on how we should treat each other, right?
Right. And when it comes to the consequences, I have learned that most people don't realize that they're not setting a consequence. When they communicate this to someone,
Yes.
they might say, I'm not going to tolerate you cheating on me.
Mm-hmm.
Happens all the time. I hear the
Yeah.
people, well, he's cheated 14 times. Where's the boundary in that? That's just a
Right.
statement. So actually setting a boundary and saying, if you cheat, then here's
Mm-hmm.
the consequence. And
Yep.
you have to be willing to stick up with that. You can't make a consequence that you can't fulfill or that you're willing to. And a lot of
Yes.
people are trapped in financial situations with their husbands or wives,
Yes.
and they can't say, if you don't do that, I'm going to leave. But if they continue to do that, in your mind, you have to plan. Okay, this isn't working, but
Yep.
I can't leave right now. So what am I going to do? The
Mm-hmm.
penalty has to be something that's proportional and that is achievable. Because if you set
Yes.
a thing that I'm going to leave, well, you don't have anywhere to go, and they're going to know that. So they're
Mm-hmm.
just going to keep on hitting the boundary and
Right.
breaking
It's
it
an
because they
idle
know you're
threat.
not going to do anything about it.
No, I could not agree with you more. And you know what it was making me think about when you were talking, is that we also set boundaries with our children. And I think everybody who's a parent recognizes that one of the keys, in parenting is that you have to have consistent rules and you have to be consistent with the consequences, right? You can't just make these idle threats and say, I'm going to ground you forever, if you come home late again. And then the kid comes home late, and then either you ground them for a day and then you get lenient, or you don't do anything, right? I mean, you have not set a consequence that has any meaning. And so
Mhm.
it's exactly the same thing with the other people in our lives. And it's not that we're trying to punish them with the consequence. I think it's important to understand that the consequence is not to make them feel bad. It's
Mhm.
not to punish them. It's not even necessarily to make them change, because we've already established I can't make other people change. I might be able to influence them sometimes. Um, but the consequence is a reflection of me saying, this is not okay with you. This is not okay with me. And so instead, I am going to do this. I'm going to leave this relationship. I am going to put my money in a separate bank account. I am going to take away the keys from the car, whatever it is. It's a way of saying, I am going to do something to protect myself in this situation.
Mhm. Yeah, and in your book you have something that I loved, and I don't know if you'll remember it off the top of your head because
We'll
I'm
see.
putting that out there. But you talk about what's the best way to say no, or to
Mm-hmm.
tell people that they're violating it or you're hurt. And
Mm-hmm.
do you remember any of that? Of
Well,
course.
I'll speak to some of it. I don't know if it'll be exactly the same thing, but and maybe this is just a little tangent on the saying no. But one thing about setting the boundary is you don't necessarily need to give a big explanation.
Mm.
And I think a lot of times we kind of get sidetracked with like trying to over explain our reasons, and this is why I'm doing it. It's almost like we feel bad about setting the boundary, and that really just undermines the whole purpose of it. um, so sometimes you might want to give a short and sweet explanation. Here's why I'm doing this. But I think with some people, you don't even need to give any explanation, because you know that the explanation is just going to be used against you. It gets, turned around, and it turns into an argument, and it just turns into a whole nother thing. And I think with people like that, I wouldn't even do any explanation. you know, it might simply be, no, I'm sorry, I can't do that. No, I'm sorry, that's not going to work for me. Just something really simple where it doesn't have to be, I can't because, my car broke down and I'm running low on money, and, I got 20 things I have to do, and my sister's in town, and, like, here's my life story. We don't need all of that. Um, Again, like I said, I think that's sort of like giving people more than they need, more than they care about. And it really isn't relevant. I mean, you don't even need an explanation for
Yeah.
doing what feels right for you.
Right. And
If
it's
something
simply
just,
that doesn't work for me right
yeah,
now. I'm sorry, I'd like to help you move, but I have something else to do. Just
right.
gently, backing out. Now, that might be a lie, but you could just want to sit home and read a book on a Saturday instead of move somebody.
Mm-hmm.
So, just putting those things out there, that ends the discussion. I think if you were to say, well, my sister's in town and you've got all these like excuses going around, then they've got something. Oh, bring your sister, help me move,
Yes,
So if
exactly,
you're just like,
Tracy.
I'm sorry, I'm busy, I can't, I don't have the time, I've got
Mhm.
something else, that closes that conversation. And
Yes. Yeah.
it's
One of my favorites is just to say, I'm sorry, that's not going to work for me. Like, what are you going to say as an argument against that? It's not going to work for me. I didn't even tell you why.
Yeah. And it makes you stronger because you don't have to give the excuses. You don't have to elaborate and make this giant thing that's like, it becomes a story. It really becomes a story, and then they can talk you down, especially if you're dealing with a narcissist sociopath. They're going to sit there and try to manipulate their way in. But like you said, it's not going to work for me, or I'm going to leave the room if you call me names. Bye. And actually leave the room. So
exactly. Follow through on it.
Exactly.
Because not too many people are going to have an argument or call names, when you're no longer there. I mean,
exactly.
They might. Some people might, but most people are not.
Training. It's so much about training, because if we don't set a boundary for 20 years and then we pop up a boundary, the person is going to be caught off guard because you've never been like this before. So it is about, like, right from the beginning. If you say you're going to be here at 5:00 and you're going to be late, that's fine. Text me, let me know. That's a boundary. That's a simple thing, that I want to be treated like this, and I don't appreciate you coming an hour late. I've made dinner and I need to know. So boom, that's your boundary, that's your thing, and they can't complain about that. If they completely keep on doing the same thing, that's where you have to make the choice about how much you value this. And I think there's a fine line on picking your battles. It might bother you that your husband leaves the toilet seat up, and you might ask him. This is a pretty common thing, you might ask him 1,000 times. But is that as important as him or her yelling at you or treating you badly? You have to weigh out what things become your battle and where you're going to enforce. Because if you're making everything like, I'm going to make a boundary about the toilet seat, then it gets diluted when there's something that is serious.
Yeah. And again, I think some of that is our mindset. It's the way that we're seeing all of those things as if they're all equal forms of disrespect. Like, somebody leaving the toilet seat up, it's not necessarily a purposeful, or even an unpurposeful, disrespectful act. It could have just, been an oversight or a bad habit or, something like that. I mean, we don't have to make it all into, every single one of these things is equally disrespectful, or equally upsetting to me. I think it's a good point that you make that, we have to, also just give some allowances for people to make mistakes and, be human. I mean, we certainly want people to give us that benefit of the doubt too, that sometimes, we're going to be late or we're going to make a mistake or do something like that, and it's okay for somebody to say, hey, that negatively impacted me, when you did that, and probably apologize and say, figure out how to not repeat that. But it doesn't all have to be, a giant, blowout. Like
this is the rule book of my life. That would be awkward and you would have no friends.
Exactly. Right. I mean, that it is true. And I think it is really hard in real life to know where to make those distinctions, especially if you have, lived your life and grown up in a family where there weren't boundaries. You really don't have much of a sense of, what are healthy boundaries and what aren't healthy boundaries. And like you said, I mean, sometimes it can go on either extreme where you continue to go on without any boundaries or very, weak, inconsistent boundaries, or sometimes you overcompensate and everything becomes a really rigid boundary and there's no flexibility in anything. And so, it's hard to find that middle ground, I think, where we feel like, yes, I'm being assertive, standing up for myself, but I can let some things go that aren't particularly hurtful, that are
and to look at what makes you feel icky. So if it's someone doing something that you walk away just going, oh my God, they hurt me, I'm sad. Being late for dinner is one thing, but someone harassing you or saying things that hurt you, that's one of the things I would think that are a big criteria, because you've got the whole array of world. And if it just is, that makes me feel shitty, I want to stand up for myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
That makes a difference.
Yeah, but that's, in order to, I think, make that distinction, you also have to be, making some space in your life to really pay attention to how you're feeling about things. Because I really believe, like you're saying, that our feelings and our physical bodies are going to tell us when something is wrong, when it doesn't feel right. Like there's sort of that intuition, or there's sort of a sixth sense or something that's like, ooh, this doesn't feel right to me. But I think oftentimes we push that to the side. We say, nope, I must be wrong. And, we don't really trust ourselves. And so, we have to intentionally say, okay, how am I feeling about this? How does my body feel? What is that information telling me? Because it's really valuable information that will help you figure out, yes, this is not okay with me. And then from there, you can figure out what is the boundary that I need to make myself feel safe in this situation, to feel good in this situation.
And it all ties back to the people pleasing, because we just want to make people happy as people pleasers. I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm saying we have to work on that and understand that our needs are more important, or as important as someone else's. So when we have this violation, or we don't have these rules in place, it does allow us to be abused. It's as simple as that. If you set the rules and you can still be a nice person without feeling guilty. A lot of people feel guilty when they set a boundary.
Yes, I really like the way you said that too, about it doesn't make you a mean person or a bad person. It really just makes you a healthy person is the way I think about it. Is you can deliver the information about the boundary that you need to set in a very polite, kind, even toned way. I mean, that is going to actually be the most effective way to do it. I mean, you shouldn't go about trying to set a boundary by yelling at people, or, calling them names, or all of those when you're in the heat of the moment, it's something you want to do when you're calm and you've thought about it. So sometimes that means coming back to things after a period of time. But there's nothing that is inherently not nice about asking for how you want to be treated, right? I think we can all agree that we all deserve, a certain amount of respect and kindness, from other people. Nobody deserves to be mistreated. And yet we have a hard time. I think it's easier to spot when somebody else is being mistreated. I mean, oftentimes it's been, the process, but, going on for such a long time that, you've gotten used to it yourself. And so you really make a lot of excuses for, why it's okay for you to be mistreated. But you probably, would be very upset, if your child was treated that way, or, your sister or your friend. So you got to at least give yourself that same kind of love that you would give to somebody else, and say, this isn't okay.
Yeah.
I deserve to be treated well, as, just the same as everybody else. It's not about me saying I'm better than anybody else and I deserve better treatment than you.
Because then we become an entitled narcissist.
Yes, exactly. And I think, interestingly, sometimes that is the fear, is that if I start thinking about myself, then I might become narcissistic, or I might become conceited, and I'll be selfish. Quite honestly, anybody who even has those thoughts, the fact that you're thinking about it probably means you're very far on the other extreme. And it's not something you need to worry about. I mean, because, true narcissists, people who are selfish, they don't think about or worry about being selfish or narcissist. It doesn't even cross their mind, because, part of that way of thinking is, just that they truly believe they are better than everybody else and they deserve to do what they want.
Yeah. And know that, again, not many people know that they are dealing with a narcissist when all of this has happened. They might have been married for 30 years and not really know.
Yes.
But it's an important part to understand off of what you just said, is that you may feel guilty and they may turn it around
Mm-hmm.
and say that you're being this and you're being that and you're
Yep.
being controlling. And, it's inside of you that you have to say, I really just don't want that to happen. And making that choice, regardless of what they call you or what they try to imply or how they try to hurt you.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. It's such a tough situation, like you're saying. I mean, when everything gets turned around on you, it can feel very discouraging, because
Mm-hmm.
even I think you may be doing all these sort of people pleasing, behaviors, but you may not actually be pleasing anybody, in the sense that, oftentimes we're trying to please people who are going to just be upset and displeased no matter what we do.
Right.
Right. And so I think to some extent we have to try to separate out, the names that they're calling us, the things that they're telling us that we're doing wrong, and say, okay, that's somebody's opinion, but I am entitled to have my own opinion, and I don't have to take on what somebody else thinks of me.
Brilliant. I love that. Thank you.
Yeah. And that's a part of a boundary, right? Is to say, like, that's a separation. Like, you can think whatever you want of me. I have no control over your opinion of me, but I can choose to think whatever I want about myself, right? And I can choose to know what's in my heart and what I believe and what kind of person I am. And I
Mm-hmm.
have to just leave the rest. I have to leave the part that's out of my control and say, it's unfortunate that somebody, wants to think those things about me, but I don't have to take it on as if it is truth for me. Right.
Mm-hmm.
I can know my own truth.
Right.
You know?
Well, I can't thank you enough for enlightening us about boundaries. Can you tell people how to get in touch with you? And I know that you've got some free stuff on your website. We'll put the
Mm-hmm.
URL down below, but do you want to tell us about?
Okay, great. So my website is livewellwithsharonmartin.com. And from there, you can sign up for the free resource library. There's, I think, 40 different things in there at this point. So there's worksheets, some journaling prompts, some meditations, just some tips and other good stuff. So I'd love for people to sign up for that and stay connected with me. Obviously, I have a blog on my website. I also do write a blog for Psych Central. It's called Happily Imperfect, so people can find me there as well. So thank you so
And
much,
I
Tracy.
love your newsletter.
Oh,
So many
thanks.
newsletters I get, and it's just like, I don't have time. And I
Mm-hmm.
just read yours from top to bottom. You're an excellent writer, and
Aw,
it's always really relevant. And I really appreciate that. So I suggest that people get on your list and
great.
start to see what you do. We started to talk earlier about your workbook,
Yes, thank
is
you.
Setting
So
Boundaries
great.
Without Guilt. And I
Right.
bought it and I love it.
That means a lot. I really appreciate that. So yes, you can find that on my website as well, and it's an ebook, so a digital download. So once you decide to buy it, you get it immediately, and you can start working on it. And I tried to make it really practical so that you can go through the exercises to help you figure out how to set the boundaries and hopefully not feel so guilty and feel bad about doing it. And like we've been
Mhm.
talking about, just feel like you are entitled and it is a normal thing to do.
Great. Yes. Well, thank you so much, sweetheart. I appreciate you coming here and sharing your wisdom with all of the viewers here that need this information. So
Oh, it's my pleasure.
thank you.
Okay, thanks so much, Tracy. Take
You're
care,
welcome.
everyone.
Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed our special guest today and the expertise that has been brought into your life. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe. And if you are recovering and you're wanting to move forward, but you really don't know how to start, and you want to create more joy in your life and get rid of the anger and the hurt and all of the memories and the emotional attachments, the triggers, if you want to get rid of that stuff, I've brought together a lot of experts that are going to have some solutions for you. So visit my website, narcissistabusesupport.com. I've got a quiz on there now. And if you take the quiz, you'll see where you are and you'll see what we suggest you do. This is your life. And when they say you need to do the work, you need to do this deep dive work. And I've got some video courses, and I promise you they will help. So this is Tracy. That's all I got. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.